I'm Nolan Brandt, 65 years old, and for 30 years I flew medical evacuation for the United States Army, though the family I lived with only ever saw a quiet old man in a guest room. For years I fixed what broke, drove my granddaughter to school, paid the bills nobody noticed, and asked for nothing back. But when my daughter-in-law introduced me to her whole family as a freeloader at her own dinner table, and the phone rang in that very same breath, I finally stopped keeping the truth folded away in a drawer. Have you ever been dismissed by the very people you would give everything for? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being overlooked, hit that like button and subscribe. The guest room faced east, so the mornings found me before the rest of the house did. I liked it that way. There is a kind of quiet you only get in the last hour before other people wake, a quiet that asks nothing of you, and I had spent most of my life learning to live inside it. I woke at 5, the way I had woken at 5 for 40 years, and I folded the blanket to a straight edge before my feet were even on the floor. Nobody was going to inspect it. That was not the point. A man keeps the habits that kept him, and mine had been built in places where a sloppy corner meant a sloppy mind, and a sloppy mind got people hurt. So I folded the blanket, and I squared the pillow, and I stood a moment at the window watching the light come up gray and then gold over the neighbor's fence. Then I made my list. Not on paper. In my head, the way I used to run a pre-flight. The gutter over the garage had a sag in it that would pull loose by winter. The dryer vent was clogged again, and nobody had noticed the clothes taking 2 cycles. The back gate latch needed a longer screw. I would fix all of it today before anyone was up to see me do it, because a thing fixed quietly is a thing that never becomes an argument. I had gotten very good at taking up no room. I had 30 years of practice. So I went out into the cool of the morning, and I did the work. I ran a longer screw into the gate latch, and I set the sag in the gutter with a bracket I had bought with my own money and never mentioned. I pulled the lint from the dryer vent, a gray felt of it, enough that the clothes had been running 2 cycles for a month, and nobody had wondered why the power bill climbed. I did these things the way I had done a walk around on an aircraft, touching each part, listening to it, letting my hands find the trouble before it found somebody else. There is a dignity in maintenance that the world does not talk about much. It is the dignity of the person who keeps the thing running so that other people get to forget the thing could ever fail. I had spent my life in that trade, one way or another, keeping people flying who never once had to think about the man at the controls. By the time the upstairs began to stir, I had washed my hands and the coffee was on. Downstairs, I made coffee in Diane's blue enamel pot. She had bought it at a church sale the year we married, and it was chipped along the spout, and it made coffee no better and no worse than any other pot. And I would have traded almost anything I owned before I traded that pot. Diane had been gone a little over a year. Some mornings I still set out 2 cups before I caught myself. I never told anybody that. It was not the kind of thing this house wanted to hear. Her granddaughter did, though. Ellie was 6, and she came down that morning in socks with the grip dots worn off, sliding the last 3 feet across the kitchen tile like she was stealing second. I caught her the way I had caught her since she could walk. "Grandpa," she said, "you have to drive me. Mom slammed." Mom was always slammed. I did not mind. Driving Ellie to school was the best 20 minutes of my day, and it cost me nothing but the gas I paid for anyway. In the truck, she noticed the little pin on my jacket, the way she noticed it about once a month and always fresh, like she had never seen it. It was small and it was tarnished, and it did not look like much. A tiny cross and a set of wings, worn dull. "What's that one?" she asked. "A friend," I said. "A friend is a pin?" "That one is." And I let it be. Some friends you carry as pins because you cannot carry them any other way. "Grandpa," she said, watching the town roll by, "were you ever brave?" I have been asked harder questions by generals, and I have had less trouble answering them. "I was scared a lot," I said, which was true, and let her decide what to do with it. You should understand what I was in the years before I learned to take up no room. Because the man dropping a 6-year-old at the elementary school in a 15-year-old pickup was not the whole of it, and I had spent a long time making sure nobody could tell. There had been a night over a road in the first Gulf War when I brought a helicopter down onto a strip of highway no wider than a driveway, in the dark, with the dust coming up like brown water. And I held it there while men I would never meet again lifted a boy with a ruined leg up through the door. I remember the boy's hand found mine for 1 second, gripped it, and let go. I remember thinking, this is the work. Everything before it was practice, and everything after would be too. That was who I was, a dust-off pilot, medical evacuation. The people who fly toward the thing everyone else is flying away from, and who do it most of the time without a single gun on the aircraft, because the aircraft is full of stretchers instead. You learn a particular kind of steadiness in that job. You learn it, or you quit or you die. I learned it. Diane had known all of it, of course. Diane had known me before I learned to fold the story away, back when I would come home from a rotation lighter by a few pounds and heavier by a few years, and she would not ask me for the details I could not give. She would just put her hand flat on my chest at night, over the place where the worst of it lived, and hold it there until my breathing found her rhythm instead of the aircraft's. That was her whole trick, and it worked every time, and I had not slept a full night since the morning she did not wake up. Her blue pot, her reading glasses still folded on the windowsill where she left them, the crossword she never finished held down by a coffee ring. Those were the runway lights I steered by now. A man does not need much to remember a marriage. He needs one chipped pot and the discipline not to throw it away. None of that fit in this kitchen. So I left it in a drawer upstairs and I loaded the dishwasher the way the house preferred, which was never quite the way I did it. "You've got the forks facing up again," Sloane said, coming in with her phone against her ear and her eyes already somewhere else. She reached past me and turned 3 forks around without breaking her sentence to whoever was on the line. "Sorry, no, that was nothing. That was just my father-in-law." That was just my father-in-law. I have been called worse. But there is a way of being called nothing that lands harder than being called something. And my daughter-in-law had a gift for it. Kyle came through pulling his tie tight, my son, 36 years old and always running late, in a soft, apologetic way. He squeezed my shoulder on his way to the coffee. "Thanks for taking Ellie, Dad. You're a lifesaver." He did not know he had said anything at all. That was the thing about Kyle. He was kind the way a warm room is warm, without deciding to be, and he never once looked at the thermostat. "Anytime," I said, and I meant it. That was the trouble. I meant all of it. I told myself back then that it was gratitude that kept me quiet. They had given me a room when the big house got too loud with Diane's absence. They fed me. They let me be near the only grandchild I had. What kind of man keeps a ledger against people who have taken him in? But it was not gratitude. I know that now. It was only ever love, wearing gratitude's coat, and love will let you carry almost anything and call it fair. There is a difference between not being seen and being made invisible, and it took me most of a year to feel where the line was. I heard it clearest on a Tuesday, standing in the upstairs hallway with a stack of folded towels, when Sloane did not know I was home. She was on the phone with a friend, the way she was often on the phone, narrating her life to someone who was not in it. "He's fine," she was saying. "He putters. Honestly, he's basically furniture with a truck." I know. Kyle won't say anything, so it's on me, and I don't have the bandwidth to manage a whole extra person. Furniture with a truck. I stood there with the towels warm against my chest, and I did not move until she had hung up and gone down. Then I put the towels in the closet, corners squared, and I went and sat on the edge of the guest bed for a while. I want to be honest about that moment, because it would be easy to make myself sound stronger than I was. It hurt. It hurt the way a burn hurts a second after you touch the stove, when the pain finally catches up to the fact of it. I had flown through weather that would have folded a lesser aircraft, and I had folded flags into triangles and handed them to widows, and I could not, that afternoon, quite manage the small domestic arithmetic of being counted as less than a chair. But I had learned a long time ago that the first feeling is not the one you act on. So I let it pass through me the way I had let fear pass through me over 100 landing zones. It arrives, it fills you, and then, if you let it, it leaves, and you are still there, hands steady, aircraft level. I thought, sitting on that guest bed, about how a person becomes invisible. It does not happen all at once. It happens in small permissions. You let the first joke go because you do not want to make a scene. You let the second one go because you let the first one go. You take the smaller chair, the later plate, the room at the back of the house, and each time you tell yourself it is generosity, and each time a little more of you agrees to be less. I had built a whole retirement out of small permissions, and I could not that afternoon remember signing off on a single one of them. They had just accumulated, the way lint accumulates in a vent, until the machine was working twice as hard to do half as much, and nobody could say when it started. The next warning came dressed as nothing at all. I was in the kitchen the following week when Sloan thumbed a voicemail off the counter speaker and cut it halfway through. "Some government-sounding scam," she said, mostly to herself. "They've called 3 times. Same voice. Very official. Very fake." I did not think much of it. Everybody gets those calls. The recording that says your account is compromised, press 1. I let it go. "If it's real," she said, deleting it, "they'll write a letter." They had written a letter. I would learn that later. The letter was in a stack of mail that had been set aside as junk, and the voicemails were the Army trying to be gentle about a thing there is no gentle way to say. But that Tuesday I only nodded and refilled Diane's blue pot and stayed out of the way, which was my whole occupation by then. Here is the part the house did not know. In 2009, I lost a man. His name was Reuben Tice, and he was my crew chief, and he was the best of us. He was the one in the back of the aircraft on the hoist, the one who leaned out into the open air with nothing but a cable and a monkey harness, while I held the bird as still as a nail. And he was the one who decided, in the half-second nobody trains you for, whether we had time for one more. The day before the worst day, in a valley in Kunar with the heat coming off the rocks and waves, Reuben checked the hoist for the 3rd time and grinned at me and said, "You fly, Chief. I'll do the hard part." That was the arrangement. I flew. He did the hard part. It had held for 2 years and 400 missions, and it held right up until the moment it did not. And I had spent every year since carrying the exact weight of the moment it did not. Reuben was 28 years old, and he had a wife named Denise, and a daughter he called Bug, and he kept a photograph of them taped inside the aircraft where he could see it on the long flights back with a full cabin. He was the kind of man who remembered everybody's coffee order and everybody's kid's name, and who could talk a wounded soldier from panic into stillness in the time it took to rig a litter just by the sound of his voice, low and sure, like he had all the time in the world when he had almost none. On the ground he teased me without mercy. In the air he never once let me down. There are men you serve with and men you serve beside, and the difference is everything. And Reuben Tice was the man I served beside. Every year on the anniversary, I wrote his widow a letter. I never asked her to write back. I only wanted the record to show, once a year, in my own hand, that a man named Reuben Tice had lived and had mattered and had not been forgotten by the one who owed him the most. I mailed those letters from the post office downtown, 16 of them over 16 years, and I never told a soul, because it was between me and a name on a wall, and it was nobody else's to be impressed by. I paid the household's propane bill that week, the overdue one Kyle had forgotten in the shuffle of a hard month, and I said nothing about it. I did not do it to keep score. I did it because a cold house in November is a real problem, and a bruised pride is not, and I had long since learned to tell the two apart. 3 days. That is how long the Army looked for me that autumn, calling a number that got deleted from a counter, mailing a letter that got sorted into junk. 3 days they tried to reach a man they had been trying to honor for 16 years, and the whole time that man was in the next room, wiping down a counter that was not his so that nobody would have to notice he was there. The dinner was Sloan's idea, which meant it was a performance, and I should have known from the good napkins. Her parents were up from Springfield, Douglas, and Patrice Merritt, the kind of people who say, "We're simple folks," while checking the label on the wine. Kyle was carving. Ellie was kicking her chair leg in a slow, contented rhythm. There was pot roast, and there were the good napkins, and there was that bright, brittle brightness Sloan put on for an audience, where everything is wonderful in a voice pitched slightly too high. I had offered to eat upstairs. She had said, "Don't be ridiculous. in a way that told me my presence was part of the show. So I sat at the foot of the table in a clean shirt, and I passed things when they were asked for, and I kept my own counsel, which was the only counsel I was ever asked to keep. Ellie sat beside me, because Ellie always sat beside me, and under the table she had lined up her green beans in a row like a little runway, and she was not eating them, and I was not going to be the one to make her. Douglas Merritt talked about his boat. Patrice talked about the neighbor's remodel in the tone of a woman who has priced it. Kyle laughed in the right places, the soft laugh of a man keeping the peace at his own table. And I watched him do it, and I understood him. And I wished, not for the first time, that he had a little more of his mother's steel in him, and a little less of my talent for staying small. It went fine through the roast. It went fine right up until the wine had done its warming, and Patrice asked in that idle way people ask, "And Nolan, what is it you did before?" Before I could answer, Sloane answered for me. She lifted her glass and swept it toward my end of the table like she was introducing an act. "Oh, let me introduce our freeloader," she said, and she laughed so the words would sound like a joke to anyone who needed them to. "Lives in the guest room, eats our food, never worked a real day in his life. We adore him." Patrice smirked. Douglas studied his plate. Kyle's carving knife paused, then kept going, because Kyle's whole life was a knife that paused and then kept going. The table waited to see what the furniture would do. I set my coffee down. I did it slowly, because slow is what I had instead of loud. "You've never asked what I did," I said. That was all. Not a defense, not a speech. Just the plain fact of it, laid on the table next to the good napkins, that in 11 years no one in that family had ever once asked me the question Patrice Merritt had just tossed off between the roast and the pie. Sloane rolled her eyes, the way you do at a man who is being difficult. "Okay," she said. "What did you do, Nolan? Enlighten us." And that is the moment the phone rang. Both phones. The house phone on the wall by the pantry started its old electronic warble, and in the exact same second my cell phone lit up on the tablecloth beside my water glass, buzzing, throwing pale light across the linen. The screen showed a number I did not know, a Virginia area code, the kind of number I had spent 16 years not getting. "Ignore it," Sloane said. "We're eating." I looked at the number a second longer than I meant to. Then I stood, said "excuse me," and took it in the hall because some part of me that had never fully retired came to attention at a Virginia number on a Sunday night. "Chief Warrant Officer Brandt?" a voice said. A young voice, careful, trained to be careful. "Sir, this is Sergeant First Class Alvarez calling on behalf of Army Human Resources Command. Sir, we have been trying to reach you for 3 days. 3 days. I thought of the voicemail deleted off the counter. I thought of the letter in the junk stack. I thought of all the ways a family can, without meaning to, wall a man off from his own history. "I'm here," I said. "Go ahead." He went ahead, and the hallway with the small blue flowers tilted, very gently, the way a deck tilts when the sea decides something without asking you. I came back to the table pale. I could feel that I was pale. Sloane looked up with her fork halfway to her mouth, and something in my face made even her pause. "Well," she said, recovering, reaching for the joke because the joke was the only tool she had. "Let me guess. The Pentagon. They need you." She smiled around the table for support. "Our mystery man." "I have to go to Washington on Thursday," I said. "They're sending a car." She laughed. She actually laughed, but nobody laughed with her, and that was new, and I watched her notice that it was new. Douglas had gone still with his wine halfway up. Patrice was looking at her daughter with the beginning of a question on her face. And Kyle had set down the carving knife and was looking at me the way a boy looks at his father when he realizes, too late, that he has never actually known him. "What did they want?" Kyle asked, quiet, the only one at the table brave enough to ask it plainly. "I'll tell you after," I said. "It's not table talk." Sloane could not let it lie. "Is somebody in trouble? Is it money? Nolan, if this is one of those scam calls, you have to just hang up. You can't engage with them." "It wasn't a scam," I said, and something in how I said it made her stop, because I had not raised my voice, and the not raising was somehow worse than shouting would have been. I sat back down. I picked up my fork. My hands were steady. They had learned to be steady in worse rooms than this one, and I was not going to let this room be the one that took it from me. Beside me, Ellie leaned her head against my arm, the way children do when the grown-ups have made the air strange, and I put my hand over her small hand on the tablecloth, and we sat there together at the foot of the table, the two people no one had thought to ask. That night I took the drawer out. It was the bottom drawer of the guest room dresser, under the folded undershirts, and in it was a flat blue case I had not opened in a long time. Inside the case, on a bed of cheap velvet gone shiny at the edges, was a cross of bronze on a blue and white and red ribbon, the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. They had pinned it on me in 2010 in a room with maybe 11 people in it, and I had driven home afterward and put it in a drawer and left it there, and I had told Diane, and I had told no one else, ever. Beside the case that night was the letter. I had gone down after the house slept and gone through the junk stack, and there it was. Official. The return address, a place in Virginia. Opened by no one. Sergeant First Class Alvarez had said on the phone what the letter said on the page, but the page made it real in the way paper does. They had found Reuben. I sat on the edge of the guest bed with the letter in one hand and the metal case in the other, and for a long time I did not move at all. There is a particular stillness that comes over you when a thing you had made permanent turns out to have been temporary all along. I had built my whole piece on the fact that Reuben could not be brought home. I had made my grief into a fixed star and steered by it for 16 years, and now a woman in a laboratory with a set of dental records and a database had reached up and moved the star, and I did not know, for a while, how to steer at all. For 16 years, the ridge in Kunar had held him. It was contested ground, then it was ground nobody could safely reach, then it was ground everybody forgot except the people who could not. And the agency whose entire job is to not forget, the ones who go back for the missing however long it takes, had gone back and dug and matched what they found against a family. And the family was Reuben's, and now Staff Sergeant Reuben Tice was coming home to Arlington with the honors he had earned in the back of my aircraft, leaning out into the open air so a stranger's son could live. I called Marv. Marvin Held and I had flown together in another life, and he had retired to a lake 2 hours away where he caught fish he mostly threw back. It was late, but he answered the way old aviators answer, instantly and clear, no grogginess, as if he had been sitting up waiting for a call for years. I told him. There was a long quiet on the line, the particular quiet of a man setting down something heavy in his own memory. They found him, Marv said finally. It was not a question. He just needed to say it out loud, the way I had needed to. They found him. You bring him home, Noel. His voice had gone rough. You hear me? You bring him home. That's the mission that never closed. You're the one that gets to close it. I don't know if I can stand up in front of it, I admitted. It was the most honest thing I had said to another living person in a year. I've kept it in a drawer so I wouldn't have to look at it. Now they want to read it out loud with my son watching. Then let your son watch, Marv said. You've been protecting that boy from your own life, like it was a bad thing to be your kid. Let him see the whole of you for once. You think it'll shame him? It'll set him free. He let that land. Then softer. You didn't do anything wrong by living, Nolan. You've been serving a sentence for 16 years for a crime that doesn't exist. Go to Washington, bring Reuben home. And while you're at it, bring yourself back too. We've missed you. All of us have missed you, and you were standing right there the whole time. I did not sleep after that call, but I stopped fighting the not sleeping, which is its own kind of rest. I sat with the drawer open, and I looked at the cross on its faded velvet. And for the first time in 16 years, I let myself see it as a thing that had happened rather than a thing I had gotten away with. I did not sleep. I sat by the window, and I let the worst day come back, because I had spent 16 years keeping it at arm's length, and it had earned the right that night to stand close. The last run, the valley already full of smoke. The radio saying there were still 2 men on the ridge, and one of them would not last a hospital flight if we waited for the gunships to finish their work. Reuben on the hoist, leaning out, the cable paying down, his voice in my headset steady as a metronome. Coming up on the first. Then the sound an aircraft is never supposed to make, and the world going sideways, and the mountain coming up to meet us. I put it down. That is the only mercy in it. I got it onto the ridge instead of into the valley, and most of us walked away from it. Most of us. There is no graphic way I am willing to tell the rest, and there is no need. Reuben did the hard part to the end. That is all a man needs to know about him. What I will tell you is what I carried out of it, because that is the part that mattered to the 16 years that followed. I walked off that ridge. He did not. There is no arithmetic that makes that fair, and I stopped a long time ago trying to find one. For a while in the first years, I thought the way to honor it was to disappear, to make myself small enough that I would never be caught taking up the room a better man had vacated. That was the wrong lesson. I know that now. But it is the lesson I taught myself in the dark after Kunar, and it is the lesson that had a man of 65 folding blankets to a knife edge in a house where he was called furniture, trying to be worth the walking away by being worth as little as possible. Grief will teach you strange arithmetic if you let it grade its own work. In the morning, Sloan found me at the kitchen table with the letter and the blue case in front of me. She stopped in the doorway. Her eyes went to the case and then away from it, quick, the way you look away from something you are not ready to understand. "Is your spy movie over?" she said, but the edge had gone thin, like she was reading a line she no longer believed. "No," I said, "it's just starting." And I put the case back in my pocket, over my heart, where I had carried a pin in its place for 16 years, and I let her wonder. I told Kyle first, because he was my son, and because a man deserves to hear a thing like this from his father before the world tells him. I found him in the garage that evening, pretending to look for a socket he did not need. He had been avoiding me since the dinner. In the soft way he avoided everything, and I let him have his busy work for a minute before I spoke. "I'm flying to Washington on Thursday," I said. I said it the way I used to give a heading, calm, once. "The Army's sending a car for me at 0800. Reuben Tice is being buried at Arlington with full honors, and they've asked me to be there and to stand up while they read something out. I'd like you to know the whole of it before you hear pieces." He set the socket down. "Dad, who's Reuben Tice?" So I told him, not all of it, the shape of it, the crew chief, the ridge, the 16 years. I watched my son's face do the thing a face does when it rearranges a person it thought it knew, and I felt sorry for him, because it is a hard thing to learn your father in one evening in a garage. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" he asked, and there was hurt in it, and I did not blame him for the hurt. "Because the ones who deserve the telling weren't here to hear it," I said, "and I wasn't strong enough to tell it to people who'd only be impressed." Kyle sat down on the workbench stool. He was quiet a long time, turning the socket over in his hands without seeing it. "All those years," he finally said, "you changed my oil and coached my little league and never said a word. I told people my dad flew helicopters. That's it, helicopters, like you drove a bus." He looked up and his eyes were wet, and I loved him very much in that moment, my soft, peacekeeping son who had never once had to be brave the way the world makes some men be brave. "Why didn't you let me be proud of you?" "You were supposed to be proud of me for being your father," I said. "That's the only medal that ever mattered to me. I didn't want the other one getting in the way of it." Sloan was a harder conversation, and it happened in the kitchen the next morning, and it went the way I knew it would. "This is a scam," she said, "or it's, I don't know, a mix-up, and you're going to drive to Washington and be humiliated. People like you don't get calls from the Pentagon, Nolan. I'm trying to protect you." I looked at her for a moment. She believed it. That was the strange, sad thing. She had built a picture of me so complete that the truth could not fit inside it, and so the truth had to be a scam. "You don't have to believe me," I said. "You do have to stop." She blinked. "Stop what?" "Stop deciding who I am out loud in front of my granddaughter," I said. There was no heat in it. Heat was never the tool for this. "You can think whatever you like, but you will not make my worth a joke at that table again. That part is finished." I had not raised my voice. I had not needed to. In 30 years, I had learned that real authority is the quietest thing in the room, that the man who has to shout has already lost the aircraft. Sloan heard something in the level of my voice that she had never heard from the furniture, and she took a small step back, and she did not finish the sentence she had started. "I'm not trying to take anything from you," I said, gentler now, because a boundary held gently holds longer than one held hard. You've given me a room and a place at your table and time with my granddaughter, and I am grateful for all of it, and I will keep earning it the way I always have, quietly, with my hands. But I am not going to sit in that chair and be a punchline. Not for company, not anymore. That's all I'm asking. It isn't much. She stood there with the dish towel twisted in her hands, and I could see her wanting to argue and finding for once nothing to argue with, and that itself was a small kind of progress, though neither of us could have named it yet. There was one more thing I did before the world arrived, and it was the hardest. And I did it because Marv had told me to, and because I knew he was right. I sat Ellie down on the guest bed and I showed her the drawer. "This is a friend of mine," I said, and I took out the medal instead of the pin this time. His name was Reuben. He was in the helicopter with me in the back, and his job was to reach out and pull the hurt people up to safety. He was very good at it. He saved a lot of people, and one day he didn't come home, and for a long time nobody could find where he was, and now some very good people finally found him, and on Saturday we're going to bring him to a special place and thank him properly. Ellie considered this with the terrible seriousness of the young. "Is that why you were sat in the truck?" she asked. "When I asked if you were brave?" "That's why," I said. "You should tell people," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, which to her it was. "So they know Reuben." Out of the mouths of 6-year-olds, I had spent 16 years deciding it was noble to say nothing, and it took a child 10 seconds to find the hole in it. If you keep a good man a secret to protect yourself, the person you protect is you, and the person you cheat is him. That afternoon, Douglas Merritt found Kyle on the porch. I was around the side of the house fixing the gate latch, the longer screw finally in my pocket, and I heard Douglas ask my son, low, "Is there any chance the old man's telling the truth?" There was a pause. Then Kyle said, "I saw the medal, Doug. It was real. He showed Ellie before he showed any of us. That's the part that's killing me. My 6-year-old knew who my father was before I did." I finished the latch. It swung true and quiet, the way a latch should. Sloan had wanted evidence. I had spent a lifetime making sure there was none of it in this house, keeping my own history folded away in a drawer under the undershirts so that no one would ever be impressed by me for the wrong reasons. That was about to end. Not with a shout. In the gentlest way I knew, the truth was going to walk up to the front door on its own 2 feet, and there would be nothing left to argue about. The world I had built by disappearing began, that week, to reappear without my permission, and it started with a knock on the door on Wednesday afternoon. Sloan answered it. I heard her from the kitchen, using the voice she saved for salespeople and canvassers, brisk and already closing. "Yes, can I help you?" Then I heard the voice that answered her, and I set down the wrench. "Ma'am, I'm looking for Chief Warrant Officer 5 Nolan Brandt. I'm Brigadier General Miriam Cargill, United States Army. This is my aide, Captain Reyes." I came around the corner drying my hands on a rag. There on the front step, in a service uniform that had been pressed to a memory of an edge, stood a woman with a general officer's star on each shoulder and 16 rows of ribbon on her chest, and behind her a young captain, and behind them a dark sedan at the curb with its engine still running. The general looked past Sloan and found me, and something in her posture changed, straightened, though she had already been standing straight. "Chief," she said, and she said the word the way you say a word you respect. "It is an honor. The Army has been looking for you. I wanted to brief you myself. I have been called a great many things in my life. In that doorway, in front of my daughter-in-law, a general of the United States Army called me an honor, and Sloan stood between us with her hand still on the door she had been about to close, and I watched the whole architecture of what she believed about me come down without a sound. "General," I said, "come in. You'll have to excuse the house. Please, sit." Sloan moved out of the doorway like a woman walking on a floor she no longer trusts. She had opened that door 100 times for delivery drivers and canvassers, and the man who read the meter, and she had opened it just now expecting one more small nobody to send politely away, and instead the United States Army had come to her front step and called her father-in-law an honor. I will not pretend I felt nothing watching it. I had spent a year being corrected about forks in that house, But mostly what I felt was tired and a little sad, because it should never take a general at the door for a family to wonder who is living in the back room. They sat in the living room that had never held anything larger than a television argument, and General Cargill laid it out plainly, the way good officers do. Reuben's remains had been recovered and identified. There would be a full honors interment at Arlington on Saturday. The Tice family had requested that the surviving aircraft commander be present and had asked for me by name because Reuben had written home about me all those years ago, and his people had never forgotten the name of the man their son flew with. "And there is one more thing, Chief," Cargill said. The captain opened a folder and set it on the coffee table, and I could see the top of a document I had not seen since a small room in 2010. "Your Distinguished Service Cross was awarded quietly, at your request at the time. The Army would like, at the ceremony, to read the citation aloud, on the record, in front of the family, if you'll permit it." I looked at the folder for a long moment. "He earned more of that day than I did," I said. "He'll be honored too, Chief," she said gently. "But Saturday, some of it is for you. You don't get to refuse all of it. Not this time." She let that sit a moment. Then she said quieter, "I read your file on the flight out here, Chief. All of it. The flight logs, the after-action reports. I have been in this Army for 29 years, and I have commanded some of the finest people it has ever produced. And I want you to hear me say that what you did over that valley is taught, now at the schoolhouse, to young aviators who have no idea the man who did it is alive and sitting in a guest room in Missouri. They fly the way they fly partly because of you. I thought you should know that before Saturday, in case Saturday is too loud to hear it in." I did not have anything to say to that. I am not sure there was anything to say. Kyle, standing in the kitchen doorway, made a sound like the air had gone out of him. Sloan had both hands pressed to her mouth. And I sat in my son's living room, in the ordinary lamplight, and let a general tell me a thing my own family had never thought to wonder about. And I understood that the drawer upstairs had cost me more than I had ever let myself count. When they had gone, the sedan pulling away smooth and dark down our ordinary street, the house was very quiet. Sloan stood at the window with her arms crossed over herself, watching the empty curb. That night I heard her and Marv on the phone. She had called him, of all people, gotten his number from Kyle, because she needed someone to tell her it was real, and she could not ask me. Marv, God bless him, was kind to her. I heard her at the kitchen table after, her phone in her hand, and I came down for water and she did not hear me. She was reading. The screen showed a page, an old news brief, a line or two about a Valor Award, my name in it. She read it once, then she read it again. Then she read it a third time, and she set the phone down on the table like it had gone hot in her hand, and she pressed her fingers to her mouth, and for the first time in the year I had lived under her roof, my daughter-in-law could not think of a single thing to correct. I want to tell you she apologized and it was mended, but that is not how the good repairs go, and I would not respect you enough to pretend it is. She came to the guest room doorway on Thursday morning. I was pressing the trousers of a uniform that had waited 15 years for a reason to be pressed. "Nolan," she said, and stopped. She tried again. I don't know how to make this right." "You probably can't," I said, not cruelly, just true. "Not the whole of it, but you can start something." She stepped in a little. "Tell me the first thing. I'll do it." I set the iron on its heel. "Learn his name," I said. "Reuben Tice. Say it out loud. He's the reason there's a man in a doorway you can apologize to. Start there." "Reuben Tice," she said carefully, like a word in a language she was ashamed not to know. And then, quieter, "Can I drive you Saturday? Not the Army. Me. Can I be the one who drives you?" I looked at her for a while. It would have been easy to keep the door shut. I had earned the right to keep it shut, but I have buried enough people to know that a shut door is a poor thing to be left holding, and grace costs less than it looks like it will. "You can drive me to the airport," I said. "That's the first thing. We'll see about the rest." She nodded fast, gratefully, the way a person nods when you have given them a task, and a task is a mercy when you are drowning in a thing you cannot fix. And I want to be fair to Sloan here, because it would be easy to make her only the woman with the wine glass, and people are more than their worst evening. Over those days she did the work. She found the good dry cleaner and got the uniform right. She sat with me at the kitchen table one night and asked me to teach her the ranks, the difference between a warrant officer and a commissioned one, why the little pin was a pin and not a medal, and she wrote it down in the same notebook she used for the grocery list, and she got it wrong, and she asked again, and she got it right. That is what repair actually looks like. Not a grand apology, a woman with a spiral notebook learning the vocabulary of the person she had refused to see. There was a video call that evening that I had not expected. General Cargill's office had arranged it. Reuben's widow, Denise, older now, gray coming in at her temples, her grown daughter beside her. And Denise Tice looked into the camera and looked at me and said, "You wrote me every year. 16 letters. Same week every year. I never knew what to say back, so I never did. And I'm sorry for that. But I kept everyone." I had not known she kept them. I had written them the way you leave flowers, not to be answered, only to say, "I have not forgotten. I will never forget." Sloan was in the room when Denise said it. I saw her hear it. I saw her understand all at once that the man she had called furniture had been quietly writing letters to a dead man's wife every year for 16 years and telling no one. And I saw the last of the old picture of me fall away from her entirely. "There's one more thing," Denise said on the call, and she smiled through it. "Reuben's letters home. He wrote about you. He said, and I've got it memorized, he said, 'My pilot could set this bird down on a dinner plate in a sandstorm, and he does it every time so a stranger's boy gets to go home to his mother. He was so proud to fly with you, Nolan. I wanted you to hear that from me, out loud before Saturday.'" I had to set the phone down for a moment. Even a steady hand has its limits, and I had found mine. When I picked it back up, Denise was still there, patient, the way the people who have grieved the longest are patient, and we talked a while longer about her bug, who was grown now with a boy of her own, and about the coffee Reuben used to complain about, and we laughed, which the dead would want us to do more of than we do. Kyle found his spine that week too, which was its own kind of mending. I heard him tell Sloan plainly, no apology in it, "He's my father, and in this house he gets treated like it, from now on." And she said, I know, Kyle. I'm the one who has to fix it." And she was right, and it was good that she knew it. On Friday night, Ellie watched me pin the ribbons onto the dress coat, standing on the bed to be at my level, solemn as a chaplain. "Grandpa," she said, "were you brave?" I thought about the honest answer I had given her once, in the truck, about being scared a lot. It was still true, but there was room now for the rest of it. "I was scared a lot," I said, "and I flew anyway. That's the only kind of brave there is, sweetheart, the scared kind." She nodded like that made perfect sense, which to a 6-year-old it did, because a 6-year-old has not yet learned to complicate a true thing. Trust is not a switch you throw, it is a runway. You get to it slowly, in the dark sometimes, and only if somebody clears the way and holds the lights. We were taxiing, that was all. But taxiing is how every flight begins. Marv met me in Washington on Friday, in the lobby of a hotel neither of us would have chosen, both of us in the good clothes we wore to funerals now more than weddings. He did not say much. He never did, about the things that mattered. He put his hand on the back of my neck the way he had 100 years ago on a flight line, and he held it there a second, and he said, "You flew everybody else home, Noel. Tomorrow somebody flies for you." And that was Marv's whole speech, and it was enough, because it was the true thing said once, which is the only kind of speech an old aviator trusts. We sat in the hotel bar that did not deserve us, and we drank coffee, because neither of us drinks anymore, and we told the old stories, the ones you can only tell to the one other person who was there. Marv had flown the wing aircraft on more of my missions than either of us could count, and he was one of the few living men who had heard Kunar over the radio as it happened, from 3,000 feet, unable to do anything but watch and pray and hold his own bird steady for the wounded we did manage to bring out. We had never once talked about that night in 16 years. We talked about it now, quietly, in a bad hotel bar, two old men with cooling coffee, and it turned out we had each been carrying the other's silence as a weight, each thinking the other blamed him, and it turned out neither of us did, and had never. And we could have saved ourselves a decade and a half of it if either of us had known how to say a hard thing out loud. That is the tax old soldiers pay. We are so good at caring that we forget we are allowed to set a thing down in front of a friend. She'd be here, Marv said, meaning Diane, because he had loved her too, the way you love your best friend's wife, from a respectful distance and completely. She'd be in the front row telling you to stand up straight. She'd have ironed the uniform better than the dry cleaner, I said, and we laughed, and it was a good laugh. The kind that has a little grief folded inside it like a note in a pocket. The Merritts came to the hotel that evening. Douglas and Patrice, who had smirked and studied their plates, stood in the lobby looking smaller than they had at the good napkin dinner, and Douglas put out his hand. "We'd like to be there tomorrow," he said. "If it's all right, we'd understand if it isn't." I could have made him wait for it. I did not. "It's all right," I said, and I shook his hand, and I meant it, because the point of tomorrow was never to make anyone feel small. I had spent enough of my life around the making small of people to know I wanted no part in handing it back. "For what it's worth," Douglas said, still holding my hand, "I studied my plate at that dinner. I should have said something. A man my age ought to know better than to let a thing like that go by." "I'm sorry, Nolan." "You're saying it now," I said. "That's the part that counts. Most people never get around to the now." Patrice did not say much, but she had knitted something on the drive up, a plain gray scarf, and she pressed it into my hands without a word. And sometimes an apology comes as a scarf from a woman who does not have the words, and you take it in the spirit it is given. That night I walked out alone, down toward the mall, where the monuments stand up white and lit against the dark. I did not rehearse anything. There was nothing to rehearse. I walked, and I thought about Diane, who had known all of it, who had lived beside the drawer and the pin and the letters written every year, who had said to me once, when I told her the medal could stay where it was, "It's in the drawer because you're still carrying it, Nolan. You'll set it down when you can carry him home instead." She was right. She was almost always right. And she was not here to see that the day had finally come. And that was the sharpest thing in the whole business, sharper than any insult at any table, that the one person who had earned the right to stand beside me tomorrow was the one person who could not. I found a bench, and I sat with that for a while. Grief does not shrink so much as it changes shape. For a year it had been the empty side of the bed, and the second cup I kept setting out. Tonight it was a bench near the water, with a monument lit up across it, and no hand on my chest to steady my breathing. I sat until the cold came up through the bench, and then I did the thing Diane would have told me to do, which was to get up, go back, and be ready. She never had much use for a man wallowing when there was work in the morning. She would have laid out my uniform and told me to sleep, and she would have been right about that too. I stood a long time near the water. Across it, on the Virginia side, the hills of the cemetery rose in the dark, row on row on row, the largest gathering of the kind of quiet I had spent my life inside. Tomorrow they would say Reuben's name in front of the whole nation. Tomorrow they would read words about me out loud, on the record, in front of my son and my granddaughter and the woman who had called me a freeloader. I wondered if I could stand there and not come apart. I had done a great many hard things in my life. I had never once managed that particular thing alone, and Diane was not coming, and I would have to find out in the morning what I was made of without her. Arlington in the morning is greener than you expect, and quieter, and the quiet has a weight to it that settles on your shoulders like a hand. They buried Staff Sergeant Reuben Tice with everything the country has to give: the caisson, the matched horses, the slow walk. The team that folded the flag folded it into a triangle so tight and so true that it looked carved, and the officer knelt and put it into Denise Tice's hands and said the words about a grateful nation, and Denise held it against her chest the way you hold the last of someone. The rifles fired their volleys. The bugler played the 24 notes that undo everyone who hears them. I stood at attention in a uniform 15 years pressed, and I let the tears come because there is no shame in them at Arlington. That ground has soaked up more of them than rain. And then General Cargill stepped to the front, and she opened a folder, and she said, "Before we close, there is a citation this family asked to hear." She read it: the theater and the year, the valley and Kunar, the repeated hoist extractions under fire, in an unarmed aircraft, of a mass casualty element that would otherwise have been lost. The final run. The aircraft struck and brought down under control onto contested ground, so that the men aboard might live. The conspicuous gallantry of Chief Warrant Officer For Nolan Brandt, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. The award of the Distinguished Service Cross. She read my name out loud, on the record, in front of everyone, and I made myself keep my eyes forward, and I felt rather than saw my son begin to weep, and I felt rather than saw Sloan put her hand over her mouth. I want to tell you what it is like to hear a citation read about yourself, in case you never have to, so you will know. It does not feel like pride. Pride is a small, warm thing, and this was neither small nor warm. It felt like being turned inside out in the sun. Every private thing I had folded into a drawer for 16 years was being unfolded and held up in the light in a stranger's careful voice, and I could not stop it, and I did not, in the end, want to, because it was not really about me. It never had been. It was about a valley and a night and the men who did not walk off the ridge, and reading my name was just the way the country had of saying their names without breaking. I stood inside that, and I let it turn me inside out. And beside the open grave of the best man I ever flew with, I stopped, at last being ashamed of having lived. When the citation was finished, a young man I did not recognize stood up in the third row. He was perhaps in his late 30s, in a good suit, with a wife beside him and, I would learn, 2 children at home. He waited until Cargill nodded, and then he came forward, and he stopped in front of me, and he stood as straight as a man can stand. "Chief," he said, and his voice cracked and he let it. "My name is Isaiah Pope. You lifted me off that ridge in 2009. I was the second man. I wasn't supposed to make it." He swallowed. "You're the reason my kids have a father. I've waited 17 years to say that to your face." I am not too proud to tell you that I reached out and held on to that young man, and he held on to me, 2 strangers made kin by a bad night on a good mountain, and the rows of the living watched, and the rows of the fallen kept their silence. And it was, I think, the closest thing to setting a thing down that I have ever felt. At the graveside afterward, when the crowd had thinned, Sloan came to me. She was holding Diane's blue enamel pot, of all things. She had brought it in her bag, filled it from a thermos, and she poured me a cup of coffee into the chipped old lid, and her hands were shaking. "I called you a freeloader," she said. She did not look away when she said it, which was more than I expected of her, and it counted. In front of everyone. "And the whole time you were carrying a man home. I don't have a right to ask you to forgive me. I'm not asking. I'm just going to spend the years making it right, and you can watch me do it, and believe it when you believe it." "That's the correct way to apologize," I said. "You don't ask for the forgiveness. You earn back the trust. Start with his name." "Reuben Tice," she said. "I've been saying it every day. I'm going to teach it to Ellie." I drank the coffee. It was not good coffee. It came from a thermos, and it had been in a plastic lid. It was the best cup I had had in a year. We went home. The guest room became my room, with a lock I never used, and a nameplate Ellie made me out of construction paper that said Grandpa in 6 colors. The little pin, the dust-off crest, sits on the dresser now instead of on a jacket, out where anyone can see it, less tarnished than it was, because I have started, at last, to keep it clean. Things did not turn into a fairy tale. Sloan and I still rub each other wrong some mornings. She still thinks I stack the dishwasher backward, and she may be right. But she asks me about the flying now, on the long drives, and she listens with the whole of her face. And last month she took Ellie to the library and helped her find a book about medical evacuation. And I heard my granddaughter tell a friend on the porch, matter-of-factly, "My grandpa flew the helicopter that goes to save people. He got scared and he did it anyway." Word for word what I told her. A child keeps the true things and drops the rest. On the anniversary this year, for the first time in 16, I did not write the letter alone. Sloan sat at the kitchen table with me while I wrote it, and when I was done, she asked if she could add a line, and I said yes, and she wrote, in her own hand, under mine. "We know his name now, all of us. We will teach it forward," and she signed it, and Kyle signed it, and Ellie drew a helicopter, and we mailed it together from the post office downtown, the whole family, on a Saturday, in the open, where anyone could see. If you have ever been treated like furniture by the very people you would fly through fire for, I want you to hear me tonight. You do not have to announce your worth. You do not have to win the argument at the table. Live your worth quietly, keep your word, carry the ones you love however far you have to carry them, and let the truth land in its own time. It will land. It landed on me at 65 in a hallway with little blue flowers on the wall, and it was worth the wait. I flew a great many people home in my life. I brought back the wounded and I brought back the lost. And in the end, on a green hill in Virginia, the last one I finally brought home was me. If this story meant something to you tonight, if you have ever loved someone through pain or been overlooked by the people closest to you, or learned late that it is never too late to be seen, I hope you will share it with someone who may need to hear it. Tell me in the comments about the quiet person in your life whose whole story you never thought to ask for. And remember, no matter your age, it is never too late to choose dignity over noise, patience over pride, and love over being right. Thanks for spending this time with me. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. It wasn't easy to tell, and I think you know by now that the medal was never the point. Bringing Ruben home was the point. Being seen by my own family, at last, was the gift I didn't know I was still waiting for. Let me ask you 3 things before you go. Have you ever kept the most important part of your life quiet because saying it out loud felt like too much to carry? Is there a quiet person at your own table whose whole story you have never thought to ask for? And when someone finally offered to earn back your trust, did you let them, or did you keep the door shut? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and I answer when I can. If this story moved you, please like it, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to be seen. I'll be here next time.